Then comes Dan Haar, who is with the Hartford Courant. He's a columnist there, and he joins us now by the phone. Good morning, Dan. Welcome to KTRS here in St. Louis.
Good morning. How are you? How's the Midwest?
We're doing fantastic. Do you have any affiliation with St. Louis? Do you know people in St. Louis? Are you from St. Louis?
I'm not from there. My brother lives there, and sister-in-law. He's lived there for, it must be 30 years now.
Okay, so your brother lives in St. Louis for 30 years.
Yes.
Okay, and in your column in the Hartford Courant, you wrote a column, an open letter to St. Louis, and you are advising St. Louis to don't do it.
Well, that's right.
What's going on here?
Well, specifically, I'm saying don't build the stadium on that site, that industrial site just south of the bridge there. Is land that could be used to really revive the whole riverfront in a walkable, human-scale development. It's not going to happen right now because Lacquees Landing, I'm sure it's doing fine, but it's not expanding at the moment. You have Washington Street. You have lots of areas of the city where people go, and there's not a big demand for that. But I'm saying that spot someday is going to be a great revival, maybe in 20 years. But it's not a good place for a stadium because a stadium, 8 days a year, okay, 10, okay, you get soccer, so you get 28 days a year. It's not happening. That's not a great use of that site, and it's $1 billion. It's crazy.
That site has stood vacant for many, 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 many years. So why not do something with it? It's clearly a blight. It's clearly a stain on the city. Why not fix it up? It will be used as a park and bikes and paths and all that type of stuff. That will actually be somewhat better for people to come and go visit and at least sort of go and ride a bike around, because right now no one's visiting it anyway because it looks like Skid Row.
You know, that's why I wrote the open letter, because we thought that in Hartford about our blight 2 generations ago. Hartford was a rich city, and we had some very powerful politicians, and we had a lot of money. And so we said, listen, we got set. That was the era of urban renewal, the early era of urban renewal, when the highways were first being built. And Hartford tore down 8, 10, 12 city blocks called Front Street of what we thought was blight. And now looking back, we think, well, gee, it would be great if we had that human-scale development back on the riverfront. The worst thing to put on your riverfront is something that cuts off the riverfront from the rest of the city. And that's what a stadium does. Especially now, baseball is great because you're using it 81 days a year, right? So that's terrific. You got 81 days, and that's a lot. That's worth getting down there, and so you have Bush down there. Well, you call it Bush 2, or do you just call it Bush?
We call it Bush Stadium.
Okay.
Yeah.
I go by. I remember, the old Bush. Everybody
sure
sort of reminiscent. But now you've got, what do you call the bridge? Do you call that the Stan Musial, the Stan?
Right.
Yeah. You could imagine someday that being a sort of a walkable river connector with, Illinois, East St. Louis there, and part of a whole park system, just what you imagine, except the stadium doesn't help matters.
Well, but those you don't care about the buildings per se, right? Because the buildings, as great as they are to keep old buildings, to renovate them would be cost prohibitive. I mean, those buildings are barely standing as they are.
Well, it's just the one landmark that would be kept under the plan with the arches, right? That would be kept in any case.
Well, but there are other buildings that would be torn down.
No, I understand that, but there's such a thing as contributing buildings that are not landmarks that are worth keeping. I saw my brother went down there. He shot pictures. I vaguely recall when I've been in Lacquees Landing, seeing what's just past there, which is not real nice. It's an old, crumbling industrial neighborhood. And there may be 1 or 2 or 3 viable businesses there.
Yeah, but hold on a second. But hold on a second, Dan, because you haven't been in those buildings. I have been in those buildings. I've talked to people who have been in those buildings. I've talked to people who have thought about actually redeveloping those buildings. It's cost prohibitive. Those buildings are flooded in the basement. How much money are you going to want to put forward tax dollars, because no private entity is going to go in there? How much tax dollars do you want to spend to save buildings that are just not savable?
Well, you're talking here about, I think it's $355 million of public funding, 300 from the extension of the bonds, and another 55, and then maybe another 100 of public spending for the stadium. So that's not, the stadium doesn't return money fiscally to the tax holders. It's not happening. Nobody's arguing that it does.
Well, right, because if it did, the Dome Stadium would have renovated that area in the last 20 years by itself. But clearly, I agree with you. A stadium does not bring economic revitalization to the area.
Or fiscal money. In other words, it doesn't. The tax, the
right.
incremental additional taxes that are generated by a stadium because of activity in and of itself don't pay for the cost of the stadium.
That's right. Same as roads. Roads are a money loser.
Well, they may or may not be. Roads bring people to places where they work. So, this economic stuff gets very esoteric, because if you feel good in St. Louis because you've got the Rams, and you got to be better than 6-10 to feel good over the years. But if you feel good, seriously, because you got the Rams, then there is an economic value to a region feeling good about itself.
Yes.
And I get that.
Yes.
I'm not saying let the team go. I'm saying, don't pay $500 million for a stadium that clogs up an area that could be a great future development for human scale.
So you as a Hartford Current columnist would rather see the St. Louis build their stadium out in a cornfield somewhere?
Well, you got a lot of space between downtown St. Louis and a cornfield. There are spaces that are upland a little bit, and your former mayor suggested across the river. I understand that becomes, because it's a different state, there's a different revenue stream, and that becomes a whole different ball of wax. Of course, New Jersey did it with the Giants Stadium in the Meadowlands. That's a perfect location for New York. You look at that example.
That's a terrible location in New York. Anybody who lives, it takes you an hour. It takes you literally 3 hours to get back into Manhattan if you're driving from the Meadowlands.
But it's a perfect location for me, because my brother, who lives in St. Louis, he and I grew up 5 miles away in New Jersey.
All right. Well, just as long as it's convenient for Dan Haar, then that's all that matters.
But I want to make the point seriously that the reason that I'm writing from Hartford is not just because, I've been to St. Louis and I know St. Louis a little bit, right? I'm no expert on St. Louis. What I am an expert on, and what I do know, is Hartford. And I know that Hartford learned the hard way over and over again that if you tear down what's there and build some very large edifice, more often than not, it doesn't work for economic development in that city.
All right, last question. Last question for you, Dan Haar. Here's your exit question.
Yes.
Would you have rather have saved the buildings, the historic buildings on the arch ground, or have built the arch?
It's an easy no-brainer. Anyone would be an idiot if they didn't say the arch. The arch is an international symbol of St. Louis.
Okay, don't you think there were people at the time saying, no, save those buildings?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Show me something as important as the arch to St. Louis's future, and I'll say build it.
Yeah, but you didn't. You only have the history. You have the benefit of the last 50 years.
Right.
At the time, the Hartford Current columnists of the world were saying, "What? You want to build a what? A giant croquet wicket on the riverfront? That's ridiculous."
Yeah, it must have looked wild. I tell you, the arch really works. I'll tell you.
I agree.
But let me ask you this:
yes,
could they have built the arch and kept some of that stuff? Because right now it's about a mile long of just vast openness.
Well, they're actually redoing it and sort of making it more family friendly, more bike friendly, more people friendly, so to be able to use more of the grounds. So
maybe if they had kept some of that old blight. Listen, you guys are lucky because the highway doesn't go right on the river. In Hartford, the highway is directly on the riverfront, so there's no space.
David Haar, we got to run, but tell your brother and your sister-in-law hi for us. I'm sure they're listening to you right now and hanging their head in shame. But
I hope not. A pleasure and a privilege, St. Louis.
David Haar,
get out there this year.
You got it. Be good. Hartford Current columnist, bringing it.
I understand where he's coming from.
I don't disagree. I mean, it's a valid point.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you got to put the stadium somewhere, and everybody owns something.
That he cared enough, first of all, to put some thought into it and figure out what else could be done.
6:32. Check that. 7:32 here. Big 550 KTRS.